Here to discuss her book, Thicker Than Water, a memoir, please welcome actor, producer, director, activist, and author, Kerry Washington. With Clint Smith, the staff writer at The Atlantic.
Thank you.
Hello, hello. How's everyone doing? Good, good.
Good.
It is such a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you so much for coming out to the Atlantic Festival. It is a delight to be here with one of the preeminent actors of our time, Kerry Washington.
Oh my gosh, I'm pinching myself. I was saying to the team that I'm here with in town, like, I'm so excited about this conversation because I'm such a huge fan, as you know, of yours. And so thank you all for being here with us as we just fan over each other. Yeah.
This book, we're here to talk specifically about this book, but also much more. This is, just so everybody should know, this is a beautifully written book. It's a beautifully crafted book. And you can't say that about every celebrity memoir. And so I almost want to begin by talking about like who some of your literary influences are. Like who are some of the people that inspired you to come to this book and to come to your other written work in the way that you do?
So we talked a little bit about this backstage, but one of my favorite memoirs is Ashley C. Ford's Somebody's Daughter. And that book was really inspiring for me because she writes with a lot of honesty about her family, and her parents are still alive, as are mine. So I thought, okay, somebody's done this and survived it. But also, you know, I mean, I said to you when I reached out to you, one of the reasons why I just admire and respect your work so deeply, but the word is passed. I felt like you were doing on an institutional level what I was trying to do within my family, trying to grapple with the history of who we are, of who we've been, or how we got here, and bring it forward, trying to like really beg my parents to come to terms with the truth of our family. So I think there was a lot of your writing that influenced my work. But I love memoirs. I love really meaningful memoirs. Jane Fonda's work, and obviously Michelle Obama. And I think also I just love language. You know, as an actor, I'm always trying to figure out why that word in this moment, or, you know, what am I saying here? What's the music of the language? And so I think I brought a lot of my awareness of language as an actor into the writing process because it's newer for me than other endeavors.
Absolutely. And you alluded to this, but at the heart of the book is a sort of secret that's been at the center of your family life for your entire life until recently. Can you talk a little bit about that for folks?
Sure. So about 5 years ago, my parents unwillingly, or not enthusiastically, maybe is a better word, unenthusiastically sat me down and shared with me that my dad is not my biological father. And they were, in a way, forced to. They were sort of put in a corner because I was ending my time at Scandal. And Skip Gates, Professor Gates, approached me about his show, Finding Your Roots. And I love it, yes. And he said, you know, now you have time. Like, we've wanted you to do this show for so long, but you've been so busy working these long days. Like, do you want to do it? And I said, yes. And I called my parents, and they said, great. And then they sent us these DNA kits, and my dad started to have panic attacks.
Oh, man.
And it began this transformational process for my family of, for the first time, having to live in reality with each other. And they really weren't, I mean, their plan was to take this to their grave. I share in the book that when they first told me, my mom said, well, I was gonna write it down in a letter to you and put it in a safe deposit box. And I was like, you've had cancer twice and you're almost 80. Like, when were you gonna write this note? When was that gonna happen? But she now admits that, like my dad, her plan was to take it to her grave. And really, he Skip Gates encouraged them to tell me. He said, this has happened a few times on the show. I've seen this happen, and what's hardest for a lot of people is to not be able to make peace with this information and with each other because not everybody's alive. And you have this opportunity while you're alive to give her this information and walk through it together as a family. So I'm really grateful that they did tell me.
And it ended up being, and this is one of the parts of the book that I love so much, is how you talk about how it allowed you and your father's relationship, which had always been, I don't know if you want to say strained, or you talk about how you knew that there was something missing, or that there was something, a sort of tension, an unresolved tension at the heart of your relationship through your childhood into your adulthood, but that the revelation of this piece of information allowed you all to establish almost a new relationship on terms of honesty that had never existed. Because I think you mentioned that he always wondered, or you wondered if he wondered, if your relationship and your love for him was contingent on this idea of him being your biological father, but it allowed you to do something different.
Yeah, when they told me, a lot of things happened, obviously. It was like time slowed down, everything turned upside down. But I realized that, I was looking at my dad, who was just heartbroken, because I think he was afraid that this information would mean that we would no longer be connected to each other. Yeah. And what I realized in that moment was that every time I had said, I love you to my dad, it had been on the condition of a lie. And so there must have been some part of him, conscious or unconscious, that thought she loves me because she thinks I am her biological father. And therefore, maybe if she knows I'm not, she won't love me. And I actually said to him that day, that first day, like, I now have the opportunity to show you what it feels like to be loved unconditionally. Because I'm not going anywhere. Like, he's my dad, and he's always gonna be my dad. I also know and knew in that moment that I had this additional new 50% of my DNA that was a mystery. Like, there was this whole new unknown part of myself that I also wanted to explore. I think that part of it he wasn't as excited about. He would have liked to just say, like, he would have loved it if I just said, like, you're my dad and I'm your daughter and end of story. But I hold space for more complicated story. Yeah. I like a good B story. And so I was like, when they asked me how I felt, I remember one of the things I said, because I truly was like excited, like elated in a way. Like, this felt like my call to adventure, but I also knew that wasn't an appropriate thing to say. Like, this is awesome. So, and I did have other, as it went on, the anger boiled up. Like, there were lots of other emotions that came, but in the moment they said, how do you feel? And I said, I feel curious. Because that felt like a measured way to let them know that this was gonna be a beginning for me. Yeah. But to also not, like, distance them from me.
Are you in the process now of looking for, and I know we've been talking about the specificity of language. Yes. And I've heard you say that very specifically you don't say you are searching for your biological father, that you are searching for your donor.
Yeah, I know. And I know scientifically, actually Professor Gates was like, he's your biological father. And I was like, that can be your language. Yeah. And it might at some point be my language, but right now, it just doesn't feel right. Like, I have to remember that when my parents made this choice, I was born in 1977. So when my parents did this in the mid-70s, it was not like today. Today, I go to sperm banks with girlfriends, and you can flip through catalogs and choose the Ivy League degree and the color of their eyes. Like, there's much more openness about this. But back then, it was this highly experimental. They were like renegades. They were so ahead of their time. And I don't know that he knew what he was signing up for, I think my parents asked the doctor just for two things in lieu of a fancy catalog. They were like, please let him be healthy and please let him be Black. And I think a lot of that was less because they were like, you know, yes, they're proud black people, but I think they wanted to maintain the secret, right? So don't give us this like biracial looking baby if you know, we want to have a black kid.
Yeah.
Which is so funny because my mom is mixed race. But anyway,
Yeah.
so I think for me, donor feels appropriate because I don't know what the relationship will be.
Yeah.
And it feels like it gives it room. Like I don't know if he's alive or not, but I might meet. Also, there was a little bit of a danger, like starting the book tour. I was like, will there be like a Cinderella slipper thing where people will come forward and be like, it's me? But
You
so
still
far
got some
that
book
has
tour
not
left,
happened.
you know?
I know. That hasn't
like
happened
looking
yet.
around.
Yeah. Any hands raised? Anybody donate sperm in 76? Want to talk about it?
Yeah.
Oh God. But so I don't know. I don't know if I'll feel a connection. I just don't. I don't know. So I want to leave room for. Maybe I'll meet this person or their relatives and feel like I am gaining family. But I feel like there's also the possibility that I could meet this person or their relatives and just feel like I'm gaining like factual information, right? Which is important information that I feel like I owe my children and that I want to know for myself. But it definitely is the beginning of an adventure.
Yeah. Your identity as an actor, a producer is also deeply entangled. The origin story of it is deeply entangled in your identity as an activist. And you were participated in I think it's the STAR program when you were a young person. Can you tell people a little bit about what the STAR program was and how that sort of performance shaped what your relationship both to the craft and to your activism would be? Yes.
So I auditioned for a theater company in New York in the early 90s called Star Theater. It lived at Mount Sinai Hospital. And it was in the earlier ages of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And so we were funded to write this show that was all about HIV prevention. So we had a bunch of teenagers who got together and we wrote shows about safer sex and self-esteem and abortion and homosexuality and losing your virginity, all kinds of issues. And then we would perform this show for other teenagers and stay in character after the show. It's some of the best acting training I ever had because I really learned how to improvise in character. Because you'd be in these conversations with the audience where they'd be like, he doesn't love you, and yes, he does. And
you had to stay in character after the show itself.
After the show,
right? When people would ask you questions.
Yes,
yeah.
And it was great because a lot of times a girl would say like, well, what are you gonna say to him? And I'd say, well, you come up here and tell me, right? So we would really engage the audience in role play. We were creating social change through art. We were literally trying to save lives using theater. And sometimes we would go somewhere, like sometimes a church would hire us and they'd be like, we're so happy you're here. It's, we really have to be saving lives. Just so you know, we can't have you say condom, and we don't agree with homosexuality. And we'd be like, what? We can't do that. Like we have to do the show that we know from a research-based perspective is the language that kids need to hear to be able to make the changes that will save their lives. And so, thank you. So we became activists. We would sort of refuse to perform certain places, or I remember there was one school that wouldn't let us say certain words, and so we set up on the quad and like performed outside without being paid because we wanted the students to have the information. And we used to go to march. It was my first time like going to marches and rallies, and I would be out there with my ACT UP signs, and I learned to be an ally to the LGBTQ community, and then did some experimenting in the LGBTQ community. So it was it was a really special time for me. Where I learned so much as an artist and as an activist. Yeah.
And one of the things I've heard you talk about is how, as your star has risen, and as after Scandal and after everything sort of blew up in your career, that one of the things you had to be most proactive about was figuring out how to maintain those original commitments, right? How in the midst of getting more money and getting more fame and having more opportunities and operating in a space where the expectation, I think, is that there's a level of, people have a sort of apolitical disposition or an objective
Yeah.
disposition, or don't speak on this or don't speak on that because it might alienate this
Yeah,
fan
don't
base.
offend your fans, yeah.
And you talked about how you had to work really hard and continue to work really hard to maintain a commitment to your values, to your sort of political and ideological commitments. And it becomes more difficult when there are more and more people telling you not to.
There's more
as you get bigger and bigger.
stakeholders.
Yeah.
There's more stakeholders and more people who, like, they eat because I eat.
Right.
So they want to make sure that I'm eating,
Yeah.
right? And I think that has been, it's interesting. It's been a very grounding force for me in my career, because I've always felt like I don't want to be less of a human because I'm an artist. I think there's such a deep connection between acting and human rights, because I think it's very relevant to the theme of the conference this year also. What you're asked to do as an actor is to walk in someone else's shoes. It is an act of compassion. Even when you play a quote-unquote bad guy, any acting teacher will tell you, if you think your character is a bad guy, you are not the person to play that character. Because you have to have compassion for that character. You have to ask yourself, like, you know, that idea that hurt people hurt people. You have to ask, like, how did this person become somebody who wants to hurt other people? Why? What are they afraid of? Do they feel loved? What do they want? What do they need? What are the stakes? You know, those are the questions that you really ask to humanize a character. And I find that I do that in life too. Like, I don't think of people often as good and bad. I'm always thinking, like, the why. Why do you think that way? And so there is a part of my life as an actor that makes me think of others and that makes me have more compassion and want us to be able to kind of value everybody's place in society and everybody's worth. And
That's so your mom was a teacher and a teacher of teachers, and you just gave like a very good teacher look to the person. It was just sort of exemplary.
It's so true. It's so true.
Oh, wait.
The first stop of the book tour was in the Bronx, which is where I'm from. And there was this huge gym of kids at the Boys and Girls Club, and everybody was like rowdy. And I was like, okay, I'm going to give you the Dr. Valerie Washington line. I'll wait.
Yeah.
And then you just
There
sit
you
there,
go.
you know. Oh, she's waiting.
There you go.
Yes, but so I guess for me, it's been very grounding to say, like, it's not worth it to give up my sense of humanity and my commitment to the humanity of others to be famous. Like, I've never, as you know, because you've read it, I've never wanted to be famous. It's not that I love my job, I love what I do. I'm very privileged and lucky to be on the cover of magazines and wear fancy dresses and all that. It has some element of fun. But what I really love is telling the stories. I love the process of uncovering the humanity and then sharing the humanity and reminding each other how human we are. Like, that's what I get to do in my work. And I don't want to be less human out in the world because of my day job. So I think that I bring my politics with me because it's part of who I am, you know?
And speaking of this, in the book you write, in general, I am built with a codependent need to see things from someone else's perspective, to understand them, to justify their feelings and their behavior, and to experience their reality as my own. And you're talking about this in the context, and as you just were, in an artistic context. And I'm curious, given that we were talking about your activism, given the sort of preceding conversations that came before us about the fragile nature of our democracy.
I mean, turn off your phone. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Then I'm like, is mine off?
I'm just like, yeah.
Yeah, right?
Oh, God. But I am curious, given that that is such a commitment, an artistic commitment of yours, how far does that extend for you politically, right? Do you carry the same sort of radical empathy for those who operate with a fundamentally different ideological viewpoint, position? How far are you able to extend that empathy in the context of your political life?
This is where I start to think about the difference between empathy and compassion, because I think I my compassion gets extended sometimes much further than I want it to, which maybe isn't a bad thing, but it feels hard at times. And I loved The Persuaders, Adnan's book, right? Because it was about how we can apply that commitment to understand where people are coming from into the public discourse and into the political conversation. And I think it's very important now more than ever, honestly. It gets hard for me when I'm being attacked. Like anybody, I can get defensive. When I spoke, the first time that I spoke at the Democratic National Convention, it was sort of at the height of scandal, which I just want to say, speaking of politics, that I'm not encouraging anybody to watch Struck material. I'm talking about a show that I was on because it's part of my life, but it is Struck material. So watch it after we have a new contract.
There you go.
But I was really attacked after that speech at the DNC, and I remember feeling terrified. You know, I had to involve like ABC Disney security. I was getting death threats, and it was one of those moments where I thought maybe I shouldn't come out and speak, and where I felt real hatred. I don't say that word a lot, but I felt really angry that people were attacking me in such personal, ugly ways. And I remember actually that somebody from the campaign, from the Obama campaign, said to me, you know, they don't do this to everybody. They're doing it for two reasons. They're doing it because your platform is so powerful, and they're doing it because your message was so effective. And that was such a good reminder to stay in the difficult spaces and be willing to have the difficult conversations. And I started to kind of force myself to look at some of the comments, not the ones that were just ugly and violent, but to start to sort of see where people disagreed with me, to allow myself to think about why and about what that means for how we have to shift culture.
Absolutely. After you graduated from college, you went to GW down the road.
Woo, woo.
Also, last night, Kerry Washington, you started 4 new scholarships. Endowed 4 new scholarships for students at George Washington University. Which is...
And they're named, the scholarship is named for my parents. It's the Earl and Valerie Washington Endowed Scholarship.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so you went to college, which your mom was very excited about.
Thank God. There was no way I wasn't going to go to college. Yeah.
But afterwards, you didn't go straight to Hollywood. You didn't go straight to New York City. You went to India.
I did.
And you went to India thinking that you would, sort of under the pretense that you were going to learn this sort of traditional Indian form of theater and acting. And it didn't necessarily end up that way. But you learned a lot more.
Yes, I had my Karate Kid moment, you know, where I went there to do this traditional Indian theater called Kathakali, and they were like, paint the fence, like that's all, wax on, wax off. Yeah. I was told to like observe and watch and meditate. I also got certified to teach yoga there, which was one of my many side hustles when I went back to New York to be an actor. But I was not allowed to do this beautiful traditional Indian theater. I was taught yoga and also this phenomenal martial art called Kalaripayat. And Kalaripayat and yoga are thought to be kind of the root movement art forms that lead to everything else. So they were really like, I know that you came here to be a doctor, but like you have to take Bio 101. Right. And that was very humbling and frustrating, but also really beautiful. Like it really allowed me to think more about process and to give theater the respect that it deserves, like to understand where these traditions come from and what they mean, and that I could have a long life ahead of me of working toward the kind of performer that I wanted to be.
You've played so many different roles over the course of your career. And, you know, when I was reading your book, I thought a lot about something a friend of mine, the poet Safi El-Hilo, talks about. And so, you know, sometimes I'll be in conversation with Safia, and I'll look back at like poems that I wrote back in college, you know, poems in the early 2000s, and I'll look them up on YouTube. I don't look them up on YouTube because they're terrible, but I imagine myself looking them up on YouTube and like, oh God, like these poems are terrible, they're trash, like who is this person, what are his politics, like why is his voice doing that weird thing? And I'll be like, oh, Safia, these poems are so bad, like I can't even, and she's like, you could think of it like that. Or you could think about how each poem is a sort of time capsule that allows you to remember who you were at these different points in your life, and what a blessing it is to be able to have these sort of breadcrumbs that allow you to trace who you've been throughout the different parts of your life. And I'm like, it's a much more beautiful rendering of the situation. And then these poems are trash.
I guess I could think about it that way.
All right. Time capsules, cool. But I'm wondering how you think about your relationship to your old roles and roles that you played 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Do you look back at some of them? Do you ever go back and watch Save the Last Dance?
I don't. I don't like to go back and watch other work. I think for the same reason. I'm like, why am I doing that thing with my eye? Like, what is she thinking? So I don't really go back and watch old work, but you know, you and I were talking backstage about, I took my 2 daughters to the Beyonce concert in LA. Yes, yes, that's the only appropriate response. But my 9-year-old, when we were there, had never been in an experience of seeing people, like hundreds of people scream my name. And because we're so kind of private and we don't go to things where I'm not like, children, watch my fans fawn over me. But they were also screaming Olivia Pope. And so my 9-year-old was like, who is Olivia? Like, what? What? And then I was talking to my manager about it. My manager was like, you have to tell her, like, she's in the show, right? So there were all these seasons where I'm hiding behind purses because she's there. Like, she's actually on Scandal under the big coats and Prada bags. One day she'll watch. Not yet. I do in a way think of each movie as a time capsule. And I know, like, when I think about them, because I don't watch them, but sometimes I will walk into a room and my husband's watching one. He's like, it was on, I can't turn it off. And I'm like, turn it off. But when I catch those images, I feel really lucky. I feel really lucky to have been able to play the women that I've been able to play and just to work. Like, it's so rare to be able to do what I do for a living. And it's so rare to do it at the level that I've been privileged to do it at. So I don't love my work necessarily when I look back at it, with one exception that I'll share with you. But I love the journey of it and that I've had those opportunities. My first film, Our Song, I don't know if I will ever again be that good on film. Ever. Because it was my first film, and it was what I was so hungry, you know, and I was so, you know, I share in the book that the apartment that I grew up in was on the flight path of LaGuardia Airport, and so we would have these planes fly kind of close to because we lived on the top floor. It was not a penthouse, but it was the top floor. And these planes would fly over, and I always wanted to be on one of those planes. I always wanted to be like somebody else, going somewhere else, living somebody else's life, which is part of why acting was such a saving force in my life. But when we were filming Our Song, I remember we were like stealing shots on the A train out in the Rockaways, and this was a really tiny, tiny independent film, so we didn't have any permits, we barely had a budget, we were just like literally stealing shots on the A train, and so we were close to Kennedy Airport, and it was the first time in my life that a plane flew overhead and I didn't want to be on it. Like, I just wanted to be exactly where I was, doing exactly what I was doing. And I think you see that in the film. You just see, like, because my character, Lanisha, also just, like, she wanted to be the best, and she wanted a way out. And I felt like that film was a way out for me.
We're almost out of time, but I do.
No!
I know. It always flies by.
I know.
But you've now stepped from, you still continue to act, but you also have your own production company and you're creating a lot of content. And I'm just curious, like, what are the stories? Are there stories that you sort of are actively looking for? Are there sorts of roles that you're like, this is the kind of role I want to play? Or do you kind of not know until you see it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have this weird obsession where I really, really, really want to make a Christmas movie.
Okay. Look,
I don't know why, it just holds like a special,
for like
Christmas
Hallmark
movies hold, yeah.
in the,
Anybody? So that's one thing. I sort of have a mandate at the company that we have to find like a really good, not a cheesy, a really good, like a classic, a future classic. But interestingly, what we say at the company is that because Simpson Street is named after the street in the Bronx that my mother grew up on, because I think that Simpson Street is my mother's Once Upon a Time. It's the beginning of her fairy tale, and I think in a lot of ways, my mom and her siblings, her parents were immigrants from Jamaica, so that's the beginning of our American dream, the fairy tale of our family. So it feels like the right origin language to begin my company. But we say at Simpson Street, we stand at the intersection of what makes us different and what makes us the same. Because we're always looking for that cultural specificity. We have a focus on marginalized communities. We feel like every single person deserves to see themselves in content, and that each and every one of us, no matter where we're born or what we look like or who we love, we deserve to be the protagonist. We deserve to be the lead in the story of our lives. But also what makes us all the same is that we all want to be loved unconditionally. We all want to belong. We all have the same desires to live fully. And so that's what we do at Simpson Street. And I'm always just looking for stories that that remind us, I guess is a better way to say it, that remind us of our humanity. And so that's what I want to keep doing. I just want to keep telling stories. And I feel like that's in some ways what I'm doing here, is having the courage to walk the walk and let myself be the protagonist in the story of my life, and to really share some of my more vulnerable humanity in the hopes that we get to all maybe have a sense of more belonging.
Absolutely. And you do it beautifully.
Thank you.
Kerry Washington, everybody.